virtual workforce that is virtual by its very nature. What are the big opportunities, but also what are the big challenges? So, because there's both, and sometimes it's just the reality. As I say, my job is leading a remote workforce, and it's the reality because we couldn't have a weekly meeting and have everyone fly in from all over the world. It's just not practical. So, Helen, continue on with that if you could.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to two. So one would be on the challenge side, the digital fatigue. I mean, it's honest and it's true and it happens. And then the other piece is engagement and just not seeing much engagement with respect to the remote piece. And so these would be the challenges. And I love the way that this question is framed because I always look at challenges like opportunities. And so let me talk about some of those opportunities aligned to the challenges. One being really reframing the digital first concept and structure in the organization. So providing some of those tools, whether it's Teams or Slack, and really having the culture engaged in that. So really leaning into those technological tools to be able to then engage in those informal conversations in a different manner. Within the context of that particular platform, but making sure that there is that informal engagement on those tools as well. And then the other piece in terms of opportunities while having a remote workforce is just the global sense of what that is. Karen, you just mentioned a number of different countries and cities, and how would that influences culture in an organization in a positive way. And so kind of going back to the challenge of engagement is really naturally bringing curiosity into those conversations and getting to know your staff, your team, and thinking, I wonder what's happening on that side of the world, or expressing concern and really engaging in some of those, again, informal dialogues and conversations that way.
So, Ava, I'm going to ask this question in a way that I hope resonates with you. You're part of a global organization, and so you have to meet you. I'm sure you meet people all over the world in a virtual way. How do you look at building relationships when people are spread all over the world?
Well, again, I think it's about communication, like it was said before, and persistence. So I think that that's the other element that we need to put in place as a really important one. So if you really want to have a nice relationship with someone who you never seen live, it requires a lot of additional effort, so to speak, because when you have the chance to meet in person, the flow is totally different. So I would understand, and I see it as a kind of a marathon rather than a sprint. This is, I think, the comparison that I could use, because then it's not so natural. You have to remember about it. You need to put a bit more attention around that. But then, of course, it's possible. So of course, it exists. But then again, I prefer to meet people in person. Of course, we work in a global environment, but since COVID ended, we enforced again all our regional global meetings, and this is really important element of our culture and connection.
And Trevor, over to you. How do you look at building relationships in a virtual environment?
Yeah, I think as a leader, number one thing you have to kind of lead with is empathy, and that kind of communication I went back to in my original answer about kind of leading in a remote work environment. I think using tools like a Slack or Teams, or really just scheduling one-on-ones or celebrating big team wins together are all kind of ways to manage in a remote workforce, but it's difficult, and that's why, of course, in every work environment there are better managers than others, and really being able to connect with people, really be able to show them empathy, really be able to show them team building and buy-in, I think are the key things. But how do you do that in that virtual environment, or through these many tools, through many communication efforts and things like that?
Okay, great. So let's move on to the next section, and this is not really about a job that's remote or leading an organization that's remote, but rather the interviewing process. And so now people are more comfortable with perhaps that first interview being done in Teams or in Zoom or Slack. And so why don't we begin with, and again, Ava, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the do's if you a tip for candidates as they prepare for a virtual interview? Any tips that you would give them?
Yeah, so first of all, make sure that your connection is working well. So find a place where you have peace and quiet and really equality behind the connection. So if you are somewhere on holidays at the other end of the world, don't set up the interview because it's usually will not work because of the noises of the connection for whatever reason. So first is to actually find good, quiet, quality place to be connected. Then again, secure the time and your attention for the meeting. So if you are having an online meeting, please don't scroll any websites or don't respond on your WhatsApp messages because it's so visible when you do that online. I mean, it's really visible. Especially if the interview is done online, like one-on-one, then the second you lose attention, it's really visible on the other side. Again, maybe the technical part, like make sure your mic is really good quality and the screen, and again that. Otherwise than that, I think the rest is pretty standard job interview. So be prepared, have a look on the company website that we will discuss, maybe prepare some examples related to the role, related to the context, whatever reason. Yeah, I think this would be more or less that.
And that technical aspect is so critically important.
Yes.
Because you really have to be prepared. I every once in a while, you're at home and your internet goes down, or you're traveling and you can't count on it. And so you have to have a plan. And sometimes the plan is just simply to say, I'm sorry, we're going to have to reschedule. Because
yeah, just last week, a candidate called in from the car saying that she's so busy and she couldn't find any other good moment. But I said, this is not a good idea, Let's find a better, even if it's in the next week. But please make sure, you will be able to actually focus on the conversation. Because this is too serious conversation to have it just in the run. It's too serious.
And you don't want them to have a traffic accident while you're talking to them. That's
no, of course. I mean, of course.
So Trevor, what about you? What are some of the do's that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think half of life is showing up, and really those basics of a good eye contact with the camera, good lighting, good video / sound are all really important to focus on for the interview. Now, these are all the basic advice that you hear, but you'd be surprised even at the C level how many people will show up with kind of not understanding these best practices. And to Karen's point there, and to Eva's a little bit, I actually had a candidate a few weeks ago that tried to do an interview when they were driving a car, and they kind of had their phone, stuck to their steering wheel. And I was just, said respectively, I'd like you to stay safe and let's reschedule this here. But I'd say, kind of some of those are the basic do's. And then in terms of more the strategic ones, it's really, making sure that you're building credibility and rapport with your interviewer. You're taking that interview very seriously. You're showing up prepared, you have questions ready. All those are kind of really good, important things for kind of the virtual interview here.
Okay. And then Helen, I'm going to ask you for a little bit of a do's and don'ts as well.
Oh, there you go. In terms of the do's, I would also, of course, I echo everything that my colleagues have just shared, and I would also add, just be nimble and flexible when things don't go the right way, or when they don't go the way as planned, with respect to the do's. So ensure that you not only have the right connectivity, but if you don't, then be able to just openly just say, actually, these things are not working out, and be the person to say it, not wait for us to help and support, because that is what we're also here to do on the candidate side, is to support and guide and provide advice on their end as well. In terms of the do's, I would continue with sort of research, reflect, and connect. And I'll share a little bit of an example, and going to the don't side. And this is, of course, less technical, but just not not necessarily connecting the dots from the example that you're sharing with the role, and then not seeing it happening in the room, in the Zoom room, right? Like, so connecting the body language to, oh, I think I've shared a little bit too much on this side, and then not being able to sort of do that patchwork. Oftentimes, we ask questions at a variety of different functions that are focused on risk, risk management, risk mitigation, reputational, operational risk, what have you. And great candidates have a very good way of sharing components of their situation, the task, the action, and the results. And there are some who, after those components are complete, then there's just kind of a walk away moment. And they're not really connecting back to why they're there to speak to the client side, or really connecting with us as search consultants as well. And so being able to read the body language in the room, because you might get cues from the Zoom room of, okay, and now what? So what's next? So being able to do that, and being the moment and flexible, those are the pieces that I would add and share in terms of some of those the do's and the don'ts.
And that reminds me of how Ava began about multitasking, for example. There is this myth that we can multitask. I will tell you, you can't.
No.
I used to think I could multitask, and then every once in a while, maybe it's on a Zoom call, someone asks you a question, and you thought, I don't know, I was not listening, and all of a sudden you think, oh no. If you're on an interview, don't multitask. You can't multitask. You have to stay present. You need eye contact. So remember, if you were there in person, you would have eye contact. You wouldn't be also looking like, oh, here, let me look at that message that just popped up. In fact, one of the things I do is I always turn off my phone, close out Outlook, close out Teams, because I'm going to get messages popping up. And so I do think you've emphasized that point. You have to be present. You have to look at the audience. You have to listen. You have to respond. And if you're multitasking, or if you're thinking about something else, it'll be obvious. You'll lose your train of thought, right? Or you won't know what they were saying, and it'll be quite embarrassing and quite obvious. And by the way, it's probably obvious from your eye contact, right? Because you're looking at the camera, you're looking at the people, and so all of a sudden you're looking down. So any case, I think those are all really, really good suggestions in terms of do's and don'ts. Anything else anyone wants to add on that subject? Oh, by the way, and remember that you should dress, at least from the waist up, professionally. They won't know if you're wearing your slippers. That's okay. But make sure that you're visually present. Just like if you went to a meeting, you would dress up for the meeting. This is a meeting. So you have to look like you've organized yourself, and learn how to use backgrounds. So if you have a messy background, I had to take a call from the hotel last week, and I thought, well, I don't want them to see the hotel bed behind me. So I just, you put up a background. And so make sure you've got a quality background if you need it. And so, really think about the visual aspects of what you're looking at, right? Anything else on that? If not, we're going to go to the last section. And here we're going back to sort of making the case for remote work. So you're someone who is, you've always been remote. That's what you want. That's what you're looking for. So, how can an executive demonstrate their ability to be a strong and effective remote leader? So the client may be thinking it would never work for remote. And you say, I actually think I'm a great candidate, but I'd like to talk to you about how I would do this. So Trevor, thoughts on that?
Yeah, going back to my answer earlier, it's really just showcasing this past ability of an executive, their past success leading remote and hybrid teams, really providing examples around that, maintaining the team productivity, those KPIs and metrics I'd referenced that might be unique to a remote workforce. Someone who's really, again, using the right digital tools, technological tools, platforms and whatnot to really drive, a remote workforce. And then, of course, just someone who's really able to highlight their ability to be empathetic, to be communicative, to create a transparent and accountable culture for their team. I think if you can really demonstrate all of those things well and effectively as a consultant to your client, that remote conversation should be a lot easier of a conversation to have.